Tom had lived in the neighborhood for 6 years. He had bought the house not for its modern charm or school district perks, but because it offered one rare thing, privacy. Tucked into the curb of a quiet cul-de-sac, the property had a large backyard surrounded by tall hedges and a thick wooden fence. Most important to Tom, it had a pool. It wasn't the fanciest, but it had been a dream of his late parents, and it served as therapy and sanctuary for his younger brother, Sam. Sam was a different kind of man. Not broken, but fragile in a world that didn't slow down for anyone. He was a combat veteran, honorably discharged and dealing with a brain that now processed the world in jolts and shadows. Tom had taken him in when things had gotten tough, when the VA waitlists grew longer than his patience, and his friends faded away under the weight of misunderstanding. For Sam, that backyard and its calm blue water meant more than recreation. It was escape, recovery, silence. Their peace was unshakable, until Karen Winthrop moved in. Karen came bearing 3 things: a pedigree in corporate HR, an obsession with rules, and an ambition to control. Within 6 months, she ran for the Homeowners Association board and won. 2 months later, she was president. Almost immediately, the tone of the neighborhood shifted. Friendly notes turned into formal warnings. Gentle reminders became citations. Karen wielded the HOA's covenant like a sword and shield, dissecting paint colors, measuring lawn lengths with what seemed like forensic precision, and launching aesthetic reviews like investigations. Tom noticed the change but kept his head down. He ignored the memo about garbage placement, the flyers about porch light wattage, and even the passive-aggressive comments about his outdated mailbox. But then came the letter about the rose bush. A rose bush, planted by Sam in memory of their mother, had been deemed non-compliant with the HOA's current landscaping vision. Karen wanted it removed. Tom didn't respond. He didn't need to. The bush stayed, and the threat faded, until the next one came. The pool was the line he wouldn't let anyone cross. It started subtly. Karen began casually referring to his pool during HOA meetings, calling it a lovely neighborhood asset, or a potential gathering point for community unity. Tom, who rarely attended, heard about it through Hank, a neighbor who had lived on the street for 20 years, and had seen 5 HOA presidents come and go. "She's got eyes on your pool, buddy," Hank had warned one evening, over beers on Tom's porch. "Wants to hold some kind of VIP welcome party for her wine club friends. Thinks it'll boost HOA morale or some BS. Tom laughed at first. But the letters started coming. They were formatted to look official, with HOA letterhead and item numbers. The first one was a request, permission to use the backyard for a small HOA mixer. Tom declined politely, citing Sam's condition and the private nature of the space. The second letter wasn't a request. It was an announcement. "Pursuant to HOA Mandate 7C, the association has designated your backyard pool as the site for the upcoming VIP community engagement event scheduled for June 10th. Your cooperation is expected. Non-compliance may result in fines or HOA enforcement measures." Tom stood in disbelief as he read the letter, then reread it. There was no such thing as HOA Mandate 7C. He pulled out his HOA handbook, flipped through every page, scanned every footnote. Nothing. The letter was fake, or worse, recently invented under dubious authority. He called Hank. "You're not crazy," Hank told him. "She pushed through some emergency amendment vote at the last board meeting, claimed it was necessary for HOA event flexibility. Most folks didn't even understand what she was saying." Tom wasn't having it. He drafted a formal reply, quoted the original property deed, cited zoning laws, attached photographs of the posted private property signs on his fence, and hand-delivered it to the HOA mailbox. Then he followed up with an email, CCing every board member, just to make a point. Karen replied within hours. Her message was short, clipped, and filled with veiled threats. "As the elected HOA president, I have the right to interpret and enforce policies in the best interest of the community. Your resistance is noted. Further obstruction may be met with legal recourse." By that weekend, he learned that Karen had begun selling tickets to the event. Real, paid tickets. Tom found a post in a local Facebook group advertising the exclusive HOA summer soiree at the poolside estate. The flyer used a stylized photo of his backyard, taken from outside the fence, clearly without permission. The caption said, "Luxury refreshments, catered brunch, champagne welcome," with a note that tickets were non-refundable. It was no longer just a matter of arrogance. It was fraud. Worse, it was personal. Tom wasn't going to let anyone, especially Karen, treat his home like some HOA-sponsored Airbnb. Still, he had to think smart. Getting angry wouldn't solve anything. Yelling at HOA meetings or posting rants online would only make him look unstable, and he had Sam to protect. He needed a plan, one that was calm, legal, and ironclad. Tom pulled out the deed again, highlighted the property lines, and printed in large maps. He gathered every communication from the HOA, labeled and timestamped each one, and assembled a file that could stand up in court. Then he consulted with a neighbor who was an off-duty county officer to confirm what he already suspected. HOA rules could not supersede private property rights. 2 weeks before the event, he drained the pool. It wasn't done in secrecy. He filed a maintenance notice with the city, posted signs around the fence, and left a bright orange construction placard near the entry gate. Pool closed, maintenance in progress. Then he padlocked the gate and disconnected the outdoor speakers Karen had somehow expected to use. On the day of the event, Tom sat on his porch, sipping lemonade and waiting. Sam stayed inside, headphones on, the house filled with calming music and closed blinds. Tom had given him a heads up, but didn't want to cause any unnecessary stress. At 11 a.m., the first guests arrived. Fancy SUVs pulled up to the curb, and women in wide-brimmed hats stepped out with their phones out, expecting glamour. They were met with silence, locked gates, and an empty pool. Karen arrived 15 minutes later, wearing a designer sundress and clutching a clipboard. Her expression when she saw the drained pool was nothing short of cinematic. she stormed toward the house, barely pausing before banging on the door. Tom stepped out calmly and shut it behind him. "What did you do?" she hissed. Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a printed copy of the maintenance notice, along with a signed report from a certified pool technician stating that a full drain was urgent and necessary due to suspected algae development. Karen's voice cracked. "You did this on purpose." "I did it to protect my home," Tom replied, "and to prevent an illegal, unauthorized, ticketed event on my private property." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. Please do." And she did. The first officer arrived in less than 10 minutes. He was the same one Tom had spoken with earlier in the week, which worked to his advantage. After reviewing the deed, the maintenance documents, and the ticket ad that Karen had posted online, the officer took a deep breath and turned to her. "Ma'am, this is private property. You don't have the right to host events here without the owner's permission. Selling tickets only makes this worse. He sabotaged the event," Karen cried. "He drained the pool to ruin it. He maintained his property," the officer said. "And I need to inform you that false emergency calls, especially involving civil disputes, can result in fines or charges." Karen looked stunned. Her guests were already retreating to their cars, whispering and posting photos online. Someone even live-streamed the scene. Within hours, the video began circulating on neighborhood forums. By evening, the fallout had already begun. The party that never was turned out to be the best thing that had happened to the neighborhood in years, not for celebration, but for clarity. People who had been quietly irritated by Karen's reign suddenly found their frustrations validated. The video of the empty pool, and the police calmly explaining property rights to a fuming HOA president, had gone semi-viral in local circles. One of the younger guests, a TikTok-savvy teen dragged along by her mom, posted a short clip titled, "When HOA Karen tries to steal a pool and gets wrecked by the law." By Monday morning, it had over 400,000 views. Tom didn't care about the views. He cared about Sam. Surprisingly, Sam had taken the day in stride. Maybe it was the preparation, or maybe just a good day mentally, but he had nodded when Tom explained what might happen, and even managed a wry grin when he peeked out the window to see people in dresses wandering around a bone-dry pool. "Like moths to a flame," Sam had muttered. The following week brought a strange mix of quiet and noise. On one hand, Karen's presence seemed to diminish. She wasn't on her usual morning patrol walks, clipboard in hand. Her SUV remained in the driveway. But behind the scenes, the emails started flying. Multiple homeowners received forwarded complaints from Karen accusing Tom of community sabotage, anti-HOA rhetoric, and deliberate obstruction of neighborhood harmony. She even suggested fining him retroactively for neglecting the upkeep of a community resource. But the board had had enough. 3 of the 5 members called an emergency meeting without her. Hank, ever the steady observer, had reached out to them personally. "She's gone too far," he had said. "If she can target Tom today, it'll be someone else tomorrow." By Thursday evening, a letter was distributed throughout the neighborhood. It was brief, but powerful. "Effective immediately, the HOA executive mandate 7C is suspended. The association acknowledges the importance of respecting private property rights and reaffirms that no communal event may be held on non-HOA land without written owner consent. Further, the board will be reviewing recent leadership decisions at the upcoming meeting." Karen wasn't named, but no one had doubts about who the message targeted. Tom felt a mixture of relief and caution. He didn't trust that this was over, not yet. The next HOA meeting was packed. People who hadn't attended in years showed up early, folding chairs scraping across the floor of the community center, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Some came out of curiosity, others from outrage, a few just to be part of the drama. What no one expected, however, was Karen's entrance. She walked in like nothing had happened, dressed sharply in a blazer and heels, hair pulled back tight, clipboard in hand, her signature weapon. She took her seat at the head of the table and opened the meeting with her usual clipped tone. "Let's begin." But the crowd wasn't having it. Hank stood up first. "With all due respect, I'd like to motion a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." It was the spark that lit the room. One by one, residents stood to speak. An older couple mentioned how Karen had fined them twice for drapes visible through the window. A young mom talked about being threatened over a child's inflatable bounce house. Another man, a retired firefighter, recounted how she tried to cite him for having an American flag, too large, for the front porch. Tom didn't speak until near the end. When he rose, the room quieted. "I don't need this HOA to like me," he began. "But I do need it to respect my home. I have a brother who served this country, who deserves peace. And I won't let anyone, elected or otherwise, treat my property like a community playground. Not without asking. Not ever." There was no applause. Just nods. And silence. Karen looked ready to explode. But even she knew the tide had turned. The board voted 3-2. Karen was removed as president. Her last ally, Janice, stormed out in solidarity, her heels echoing in the hall. A week later, Karen formally resigned from the board. Tom didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. He simply went home, grilled burgers with Sam, and for the first time in months, ate dinner without watching the security cameras on his phone. Things slowly went back to normal. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now waved more. Someone dropped off a pie. Another offered to repaint Tom's mailbox. The right color this time, but only if he wanted. The tension that had once choked the cul-de-sac began to lift. The new HOA board, led by a soft-spoken librarian named April, focused less on enforcement and more on actual community building. The newsletter became more about events and less about violations. The tone had changed. The fear had lifted. Tom even allowed the board to borrow folding chairs for a summer cookout, held at the community park, not his yard. As for Karen, she listed her house a month later. Rumor had it she moved to a stricter, gated community 2 towns over. Tom didn't look her up. He didn't need to. The victory wasn't about her. It was about the principle. The message. That people, no matter how small the setting or how petty the power struggle, don't have to roll over. That legal knowledge, community solidarity, and sheer will could stand up against even the most entitled grasp for control. And for Sam, it was about peace. The pool was refilled by late July. Sam went back to his slow, daily laps, headphones playing nature sounds, sunlight glinting off the water. The backyard returned to its original purpose, a place of healing, not spectacle. It was easy to forget how close they had come to losing it. Life didn't go back to normal overnight. Even after Karen left, her shadow lingered in odd places. Some homeowners still looked over their shoulders when hanging wind chimes or parking on the curb. A nervous reflex developed under months of surveillance and petty notices. But gradually, the neighborhood began to relearn its identity, not as a monitored zone, but as a place where people lived, laughed, and made mistakes without needing a committee's permission slip. Tom found himself both relieved and restless. The battle had taken more out of him than he realized. He wasn't one to dwell on things, but there were nights he'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the breeze ripple through the hedges, and feel that residual ache, the kind that only shows up after a storm has passed. It wasn't the legal fight or the public conflict that stayed with him. It was the weight of having to constantly defend what should have never been in question, his right to protect his home, his family, and his peace. The quiet became a kind of therapy. There were no more letters in the mailbox stamped with HOA citations. No more, surprise, inspections. Tom pulled the laminated private property sign off the gate, not because the warning was no longer necessary, but because the time for defending territory had passed. Now, it was time to reclaim it. Sam improved in subtle ways. There were more good days than bad. He started gardening, often in the early morning, digging his hands into soil like it was grounding him to something real. The rose bush, which had once been marked for removal by Karen's so-called aesthetic committee, now bloomed freely in the corner of the yard. Sam trimmed it himself, carefully, methodically, like the act gave him structure. One afternoon, he turned to Tom and asked, "You ever think it's strange how some people need rules just to feel big?" Tom nodded. "Yeah. And how others just need quiet to stay whole." There were moments like that now, unprompted, reflective, warm. The kind of moments that made the ordeal worthwhile. Not for the victory, not even for the vindication, but for what they salvaged. A life. A bond. The neighborhood, for all its previous coldness, slowly softened too. April, the new HOA president, made it clear in her first community meeting that the association would focus on support rather than surveillance. They launched a neighborhood repair fund for elderly homeowners, started a monthly potluck rotation at the park, and even formed a volunteer crew to help clean up yards after storms instead of issuing fines. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. Tom didn't join the board. He didn't want a seat at the table. But when April asked him to review a draft of new HOA bylaws, ones that clearly defined limits on enforcement and emphasized private property rights, he said yes. Not because he liked the paperwork, but because he knew how important clarity was when someone like Karen got a hold of ambiguity. He suggested one change. A section on homeowner rights, printed in plain language. No jargon. No legal doublespeak. Just a clear message. This is your home, and no one can take that from you without your permission or the law. April included it, and in that simple paragraph, Tom saw something he hadn't seen in months. Closure. But closure, like peace, didn't arrive with a ribbon. It came slowly, in pieces. It was in the way neighbors began talking to each other again. Real conversations. Not just nods at mailboxes, or awkward greetings over hedge trimmers. It was in how people asked Tom about Sam, not out of pity, but genuine curiosity. A few offered resources, others just companionship. One neighbor, Mark, a retired Marine, invited Sam to a small veterans group that met at the local diner every Wednesday morning. Sam went. Then he went again. Tom started sleeping better. The motion sensors in the backyard stopped blinking every 5 minutes from Karen's drive-bys. The cameras stayed up, but their footage remained uneventful. No intrusions. No strangers trying to check out the pool. Just birds, wind, and Sam's slow laps through the water. Still, there were scars. Tom knew the kind of damage authority could inflict when it was left unchecked. He thought often about people who didn't have the time, knowledge, or emotional endurance to fight like he did. People who gave in, gave up, or sold their homes rather than face the daily harassment of HOA tyrants. What happened to him could have broken someone else. That knowledge didn't make him bitter. It made him deliberate. He became the guy neighbors called when something felt off. When a new homeowner got an HOA letter demanding fence modifications, they forwarded it to Tom first. He'd reply with a polite, legally referenced draft email they could send back. He didn't charge for it. Didn't even really talk about it. But word spread. Talk to Tom became the unofficial advice whispered over fences, and at the community center, Karen, for her part, remained a cautionary tale. No one quite knew where she'd gone, but her name became shorthand for overreach. Don't go full Karen. People would joke at HOA meetings if a board member suggested anything remotely invasive. It wasn't mean-spirited, just a cultural scar forming a callus, but Tom didn't speak of her again. He didn't need to. Karen's absence was enough. One Saturday in late August, the neighborhood threw its first real community celebration. Not an HOA mandate. Just people coming together. Hank smoked ribs. The kids played with sidewalk chalk and bubbles. Someone brought a karaoke machine that blessed and cursed the evening with off-key 80s hits. Tom stood in the background, sipping from a red cup, watching Sam smile as he chatted with Mark and a few other vets near the grill. It was a small, quiet joy, a rare thing that didn't need a banner or an announcement. Later that night, as the party wound down and families drifted back to their homes, April approached him. "You know," she said, "you changed this place." Tom shook his head. "I just said no." She smiled. "Yeah. And that made everyone else realize they could too." That stuck with him. It reminded Tom of something his father used to say. Boundaries only matter if you believe in them enough to defend them. And now, standing on his porch in the dark, porch light flickering above, he looked at his home, not just the house, but the peace within it, and knew that every moment of resistance had been worth it. The final months of the year passed without conflict. Fall brought crisp leaves and Halloween decorations, some a little gaudy, some downright impressive. No one complained about color schemes. No one measured cornstalk height or counted pumpkins. December brought holiday lights in every imaginable variation, from elegant icicles to blinking snowmen with questionable wiring. Tom put up a modest string of white lights and, at Sam's suggestion, a single wooden star by the pool fence. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to honor a victory no one had expected to need, the right to be left alone. When the new year rolled in, the neighborhood felt different. Not just on the surface, but at its core. People had been reminded of something important, that rules were only as fair as the people enforcing them, and that silence in the face of absurdity was its own kind of surrender. Tom wasn't a hero. He didn't think of himself that way. He was just a homeowner. A brother. A guy who liked quiet mornings and the sound of water. But in the face of manufactured authority, he had done what mattered most. He had stood up, not for power, not for revenge, but for the simple, undeniable right to protect what was his, and in doing so, he gave his brother, and maybe his entire neighborhood, something they had forgotten how to ask for: peace.